Okay, so this video is going to cover how to solve an equation involving several steps. So when it comes to solving equations, there is a general approach that you should follow when approaching most equations. So that is this. If you have fractions in your problem, get rid of those first. If you have parentheses, which typically means you need to distribute, that's where you would go next. And that is where we would start with this problem. We don't have fractions, so we would move on to taking care of our parentheses. Now there's a couple of things we do need to pay attention when it comes to our parentheses here. Specifically the fact that we have negative signs in front of our parentheses. So remember, you can look at this two different ways. You can think of that negative as just an opposite. That negative is telling you to take the opposite of what you have on the inside, which would simply just mean to change the sign of everything. Also, you can look at it in terms, remember that negative that is in front of there is understood to be a 1 associated with it. So technically we have a negative 1 sitting in front of both of those parentheses. And distributive property tells us that we do need to distribute those negatives. So that is actually what we would do with this problem here. So our first step is going to be distribute both of those negatives throughout everything we have in the parentheses. So that would look like a negative times 7y. Makes that a negative 7y. A negative times the positive 2 makes that a negative 2. Carrying out our second distribution here, negative times negative 6. Well, negative times a negative is positive, and drop down that 6y with it. A negative 1 times a positive 1 is a negative 1, and that all equals 2. Now, after we distribute, we almost always have to combine like terms. So taking a look at our problem here, I do see two sets of like terms because we have negative 7y and we have 6y. Remember, like terms just mean they have the exact same variables. So a y with a y and also a number with a number is also a set of like terms. So now that we've matched up our like terms, let's combine them together. So starting with our y's, a negative 7 plus a 6. So again, remember, if you're negative $7 in your bank account and you only have $6 to add, you're still down, but you're only down by 1. And remember that 1 in front of the y, it's not necessary to write it there, it is understood. So here we have a negative 1y. Combining our constants. So here we have a negative 2, and we're going to be combining that with a negative 1. So again, if you're negative $2 in your bank account and you spend one more dollar, you're further down. Now you're down 3. Or you could use your integer rules for those as well. So same signs tells us to add the numbers, keep the common sign. And this all equals 2. Now, since I got y on the left-hand side, I'm going to move my numbers over to the right-hand side by doing the opposite of what I have. Since I have a negative 3, I would go ahead and add 3, remembering to do it to both sides of the equation. On the left-hand side, negative 3 plus 3 cancels. Let's drop down that negative y. And on the right-hand side, 2 plus 3 gives us a 5. We're almost done here. We just need to get rid of the negative in front of the y. Remember, that is understood to be a negative 1, so that when we divide out the coefficient here as our last step, remember this would be a negative 1 times this y. So to get rid of it, we would divide by it. And a negative divided by a negative cancels out with our signs here. Negative divided by negative is positive, so we get y is equal to a negative 5. Because on the right side, a positive divided by a negative is negative. Different signs will always be negative. Same signs will always be positive when it comes to multiplication and division. So we're left with y is equal to a negative 5. And do remember, if you do want to check the answer for any of these solving equation problems, all you have to do is take your solution for this particular problem, a negative 5, go on up and plug that into your y's, and simplify and check to see if you get a true solution. But for this one here, y would equal a negative 5.